You ever have a stranger look at you like they've known you their whole life? Ethan Brooks did. And 5 minutes later, a locked door and a single photograph would turn his world upside down. The rain had been falling over downtown Chicago since late afternoon, painting the streets in silver reflections and turning every traffic light into a blurred splash of color across wet pavement. Ethan Brooks adjusted the insulated delivery bag on his shoulder and glanced at the time on his phone. 9:42 p.m. One more delivery. One more tip, if he was lucky. Then he could finally head home to his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, who was probably curled up on the couch with a blanket and a library book, waiting for him to walk through the door. Ethan smiled at the thought. No matter how exhausting the day had been, Lily always made the world feel lighter. The elevator inside Sterling Tower climbed silently toward the 72nd floor. Ethan stood alone beneath the soft glow of recessed lights, his reflection staring back at him from polished steel walls. He looked tired, not defeated, just tired. The kind of tired that came from working 2 jobs, paying bills, raising a child alone, and still finding reasons to be grateful. The elevator chimed. The doors opened. Penthouse 72A. Ethan stepped into a hallway, so quiet it almost felt unreal. Thick carpeting swallowed every footstep. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline stretching for miles beneath a blanket of rain. He approached the final door and checked the order one last time. Victoria Sterling. Even Ethan knew that name. CEO of Sterling Dynamics. Billionaire. Business magazines called her brilliant. Employees called her demanding. The media called her the Ice Queen of Chicago. Ethan knocked twice. A moment later, the door opened. Victoria Sterling stood before him. She looked exactly like every photograph he had ever seen, and somehow completely different. Her dark blazer was immaculate. Her posture was perfect. Her expression revealed nothing. Yet there was something in her eyes that caught him off guard. Not arrogance. Not annoyance. Something closer to shock. For several seconds, she simply stared at him. Ethan cleared his throat. Delivery for Victoria Sterling. No response. Just those gray eyes fixed on his face. Ma'am? He asked gently. Victoria blinked as though waking from a dream. Come in. Her voice was calm but distant. Ethan stepped inside. The penthouse was stunning. Modern furniture. Warm lighting. Expensive artwork. Yet despite its beauty, the space felt strangely empty. Like a luxury hotel room nobody truly lived in. He placed the food on the marble kitchen island. That should be everything. Victoria still hadn't looked away from him. Thank you. Ethan nodded politely and turned toward the door. Then he heard it. Click. The sound was soft, almost insignificant, but unmistakable. The lock engaged behind him. Ethan stopped. Slowly, he turned around. Victoria stood near the entrance with one hand resting on the lock. Her face remained composed, but her breathing had changed. Just slightly. Just enough. Is something wrong? Ethan asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked across the room toward a large oak desk near the windows. Rain tapped gently against the glass 72 stories above the city. The silence stretched. Victoria opened a drawer and removed an old photograph. Her fingers lingered on its edges for a moment before she crossed the room and held it out to him. Mr. Brooks, she said quietly, before you leave, I need you to tell me if you've ever seen this man before. Ethan accepted the photograph. Then the color drained from his face. Because staring back at him from the faded picture was a man who looked almost exactly like him. And the man in the photograph had disappeared from Ethan's life over 25 years ago. Ethan stared at the photograph as if the air had suddenly become heavier. His fingers tightened around the faded paper. The man smiling back from the image had the same jawline, the same eyes, even the same slight curve at the corner of his mouth. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Forgot the penthouse, the city lights, the rain tapping against the glass. All he could see was a memory from long ago. A warm summer afternoon. A baseball glove. A deep voice promising that everything would be okay. Then a day when that voice disappeared forever. Where did you get this? Ethan asked quietly. Victoria did not answer right away. She studied his face carefully, watching every emotion pass through his eyes. So you do know him, she said. Ethan looked up. Know him? That is my father. Silence filled the room. Victoria slowly lowered herself into a chair near the kitchen island. For the first time since he arrived, her calm expression cracked. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal something underneath. Relief. I was hoping you would say that, she whispered. Ethan blinked. Hoping. Victoria nodded. Please sit down. Ethan hesitated. Every instinct told him this conversation was impossible. Yet curiosity rooted him in place. He pulled out a chair across from her and sat. The city stretched beyond the windows like a sea of lights. Somewhere below, millions of people were living ordinary lives. Up here, everything suddenly felt unreal. Victoria folded her hands together. The man in that photograph was named Daniel Brooks. Ethan nodded slowly. My father. And he disappeared 25 years ago. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. How do you know that? Victoria glanced toward the photograph. Because I have spent the last 6 years searching for him. Ethan stared at her. Why? The question lingered between them. Victoria stood and walked toward the windows. The reflection of the city shimmered across the glass. Because I believe he was my father too. Ethan froze. The words seemed to echo through the enormous room. What? Victoria turned toward him. Her voice remained steady, but there was something fragile beneath it. My mother died when I was 24. A few months before she passed, she told me the truth. Ethan could not speak. She told me she had known a man named Daniel Brooks many years earlier. She said he never knew about me. She said circumstances pulled them apart before she could tell him. Ethan looked back down at the photograph. His heart pounded. You are saying? I am saying, Victoria interrupted gently, that we may be related. The rain outside intensified, streaking the windows with silver lines. Ethan leaned back in his chair. None of this made sense. His father had vanished when Ethan was 13. Police reports led nowhere. Friends knew nothing. Every trail had ended in silence. Yet here sat one of the most powerful women in America claiming she had spent years searching for the same man. Why me? Ethan finally asked. There must have been other ways to find answers. Victoria walked back toward the table. I hired investigators, genealogists, attorneys. I followed every lead money could buy. She paused. Then last week one of my researchers found an old-school record with your name. Ethan listened carefully. Tonight was not supposed to happen like this. Victoria gave a faint smile. I ordered food because I wanted to see if the file was correct. Her eyes softened. The moment I opened the door and saw you standing there, I knew. She reached into her desk drawer again and placed a sealed envelope on the table between them. Ethan stared at it. What is that? Victoria took a slow breath. A proposal. Ethan stared at the envelope for several long seconds before finally reaching for it. The thick cream paper felt strangely heavy in his hands. Across the table, Victoria remained silent, giving him space to think. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass walls, reflecting off polished marble and casting soft shadows throughout the penthouse. Ethan carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a single document. His eyes moved across the page. Then he looked up in disbelief. $100,000? Victoria nodded. That is my offer. Ethan set the paper down immediately. No. The answer came so quickly that even Victoria seemed surprised. You have not read everything. I do not need to. Ethan pushed the document back toward her. I am not selling my family history. A faint expression crossed Victoria's face. Not annoyance. Respect. She slowly folded her hands together. Then read it anyway. Ethan hesitated before lowering his eyes to the page again. The proposal was simple. Victoria wanted his help locating any remaining information about Daniel Brooks. She would cover travel expenses, research costs, and compensate Ethan for lost work. There were no hidden conditions, no legal traps, no ownership claims. Just one request. Help her uncover the truth. Ethan leaned back and rubbed a hand across his face. Why are you doing this? Victoria glanced toward the photograph still resting on the table. Because I spent most of my life believing I had nobody. Her voice softened. Then I learned that maybe I was wrong. The room grew quiet again. Ethan understood loneliness better than most people. After his wife passed away 6 years earlier, there had been nights when the silence inside his apartment felt louder than traffic. But Lily had always been there. Lily gave him purpose. Lily gave him hope. Victoria had built a billion-dollar company, yet somehow she sounded far more alone than he had ever been. You really think he was your father? Ethan asked. Victoria gave a small shrug. I do not know anymore. She walked toward a bookshelf and removed a weathered journal. My mother left this. Ethan accepted the book. The pages were filled with handwritten entries dating back almost 30 years. Some pages contained sketches. Others held memories, names, places, and one name appeared again and again. Daniel Brooks. Ethan felt a chill run through him. The details matched. The years matched. Even the towns matched. "This is impossible," he whispered. "That is exactly what I thought." Victoria offered a sad smile. "Until you opened my door tonight." Ethan closed the journal slowly. His mind raced with questions. Every answer seemed to create 3 new mysteries. The clock on the wall quietly marked the passing minutes. Somewhere after 11 o'clock, Ethan finally stood. "I need time." Victoria nodded. "Of course." He picked up his delivery bag and moved toward the door. This time she unlocked it without hesitation. Before he stepped into the hallway, Victoria spoke again. "Mr. Brooks." Ethan turned. "Whether you accept or not, thank you for listening." Ethan looked at her for a moment. The famous CEO no longer seemed intimidating. She looked like someone carrying a burden she had carried alone for far too long. "I will think about it," he said. Then he stepped into the hallway. As the elevator descended 72 floors toward the street below, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph one more time. For years he thought his father had left behind only questions. Tonight, for the first time in decades, those questions were starting to answer back. Ethan barely slept that night. Long after Lily had fallen asleep in her room, he sat alone at the small kitchen table, turning the photograph over and over in his hands. The apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic outside and the steady ticking of an old wall clock. Questions filled every corner of his mind. Why had his father disappeared? Why had he never returned? And how could a woman like Victoria Sterling possibly be connected to a man Ethan had spent half his life searching for? By sunrise, the photograph still rested beside his untouched cup of coffee. "Dad," Lily's voice pulled him back. Ethan looked up and forced a smile. His daughter stood in the doorway wearing fuzzy socks and holding her favorite blue mug. "You look like you forgot how to sleep," she said. Ethan laughed softly. "Something like that." Lily slid into the chair across from him. "Is it money stuff?" "No, work stuff." "Not exactly." She tilted her head. "Then it is important." Ethan smiled. Lily had inherited her mother's ability to notice everything. He looked down at the photograph before carefully sliding it across the table. Lily studied the image. "Who is that?" "My father." Her eyes widened slightly. "Grandpa Daniel?" Ethan nodded. "The one nobody knows what happened to." "That is right." Lily stared at the picture for another moment. "Did you find something?" Ethan hesitated before explaining as much as he could. He told her about the photograph, about the woman who had spent years searching for the same man, about the possibility that their family story was much bigger than he had ever imagined. Lily listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat quietly for a few seconds. Then she asked the question Ethan had been avoiding all night. "Are you going to help her?" The morning sunlight spilled through the apartment window, painting golden rectangles across the worn wooden floor. Ethan looked at his daughter and realized he already knew the answer. "I think I have to." Lily smiled. "Good. Good." Ethan asked. "Why good?" She shrugged. "Because if somebody spent 6 years looking for answers, they must really need them." Ethan stared at her. Children sometimes carried wisdom adults spent decades trying to learn. Later that afternoon, Ethan arrived at Sterling Dynamics headquarters. The massive glass building towered above downtown like a monument to success. Employees in tailored suits moved through the lobby with purpose. Ethan felt slightly out of place in his delivery jacket and worn work boots. Yet nobody stopped him. Victoria was already waiting when the elevator doors opened on the executive floor. She stood near the windows overlooking Lake Michigan. "You came," she said quietly. "I did." Victoria's expression softened. "Not much. Just enough." Ethan handed her the signed agreement. "I am not doing this for the money." "I know. I am doing this because I want answers too." Victoria nodded. "Then we have something in common." She walked toward a conference table covered with folders, maps, journals, and old records. Years of research lay spread before them. Ethan slowly approached. Every document seemed connected to one name. Daniel Brooks. The room fell silent. 2 strangers stood side by side, studying the same mystery. Neither of them realized that the first real clue had been sitting unnoticed among those papers for nearly 3 years. The conference room remained quiet as Ethan and Victoria sorted through decades of records. Sunlight faded beyond the windows, replaced by the warm glow of overhead lights. Folder after folder revealed fragments of a life neither of them fully understood. Old addresses, employment records, utility bills, letters returned to sender. Every trail seemed to begin with hope and end with another dead end. Hours passed. Victoria loosened the tension in her shoulders and closed another file. Nothing. Ethan rubbed his eyes. Not nothing. He tapped a yellowed receipt resting near the bottom of a stack. Look at this. Victoria leaned closer. The receipt came from a small motel in Wisconsin dated just 8 months after Daniel Brooks disappeared. Most investigators had ignored it because the name on the reservation was incomplete. Daniel B. Nothing more. Victoria frowned. My researchers checked that years ago. Maybe. Ethan turned the paper over. But they were looking for a businessman or a missing person. He pointed toward a handwritten note on the back. This says maintenance shift. Victoria's eyes narrowed. You think he was working there? My father could fix anything. Cars, plumbing, electrical work. If he needed a job fast, maintenance would make sense. The room grew still. Victoria immediately reached for her phone. Within minutes, she was speaking with one of her research managers. Calm, efficient, focused. Yet Ethan noticed something else beneath her professional voice. Hope. Real hope. When the call ended, Victoria looked at him differently. Nobody noticed that note before. Ethan shrugged. Sometimes people see what they expect to see. A faint smile appeared. And what do you see? Ethan glanced down at the photograph resting beside the files. A man who kept moving. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then a soft knock interrupted them. The conference room door opened slightly. An assistant stepped inside carrying a tablet. Ms. Sterling, your board meeting begins in 10 minutes. Victoria nodded. Thank you. The door closed again. Ethan stood. I should go. You do not have to. Lily is waiting for me. At the mention of his daughter, Victoria's expression softened again. Right. Ethan gathered his jacket. Any news from Wisconsin? Call me. I will. He started toward the door before suddenly stopping. Actually, there is something else. Victoria looked up. Ethan pulled out his phone and opened a photograph. It showed Lily standing beside an old wooden memory box. My mother kept this after my father disappeared. Victoria studied the image carefully. What is inside? Letters. Family photographs. Old keepsakes. Ethan hesitated. I never paid much attention to them. Victoria slowly stood. When can we see it? Ethan checked the time. Tomorrow evening. For the first time all day, Victoria smiled fully. It transformed her face in a way magazine covers never captured. The distance she usually carried seemed to disappear. Tomorrow evening, she repeated. Ethan left the building feeling lighter than he had in years. Above him, Chicago's skyline glowed against the darkening sky. Below him, thousands of strangers hurried through their routines without knowing that two people had just uncovered the first meaningful clue in a mystery nearly 3 decades old. What neither Ethan nor Victoria realized was that the small wooden box waiting inside his apartment contained something far more valuable than old memories. Hidden beneath a stack of forgotten photographs was a letter that would change everything. The following evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Chicago feel smaller and more personal. Victoria parked her car outside Ethan's apartment building and sat for a moment with her hands resting on the steering wheel. Billion-dollar negotiations had never made her nervous. Board meetings did not make her nervous. Television interviews did not make her nervous. Yet somehow walking into a modest apartment to examine a forgotten memory box felt different. Ethan opened the door before she could knock. You found the place. Eventually, she replied with a faint smile. The scent of cinnamon and fresh cookies drifted from inside. Come in. Victoria stepped into a home that immediately felt warmer than her penthouse. Family photographs lined the walls. School drawings were attached to the refrigerator. A small lamp cast golden light across the living room. Nothing was expensive. Everything felt loved. You must be Victoria. Lily appeared from the hallway carrying a plate of cookies. Dad said you might visit. Victoria blinked. Most people became awkward around her wealth or reputation. Lily treated her like a neighbor. That is me. Lily offered the plate. You should try one. I made them. Victoria accepted a cookie. Thank you. You are welcome. Lily smiled brightly before disappearing back toward her room. Ethan chuckled. She has already decided she likes you. For reasons Victoria could not explain, those words affected her more than they should have. They moved into the kitchen where the old memory box sat on the table. The wood was scratched from years of use. Dust gathered along the edges. Ethan carefully lifted the lid. Inside rested photographs, greeting cards, ticket stubs, and dozens of small reminders from another time. For nearly an hour, they sorted through everything. Some items triggered memories for Ethan. Others revealed details Victoria had never known. Slowly, pieces of Daniel Brooks began to emerge as something more than a mystery. He became a real person again. A father. A dreamer. A man who loved fixing things. Then Ethan paused. Wait. Buried beneath a stack of photographs was a sealed envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. Across the front, written in familiar handwriting, were 4 words. For Ethan. When you are ready. The room became silent. Ethan stared at the envelope as if afraid it might disappear. I have never seen this before. Victoria leaned forward. Open it. Ethan carefully broke the seal. Inside was a letter. The handwriting matched old birthday cards he remembered receiving as a child. His hands trembled slightly as he began reading. The first few lines stole the breath from his lungs. If you are reading this, it means I never found my way back in time. Please know that leaving you was never my choice. Victoria watched his expression change. Confusion, hope, heartbreak, then something else. Ethan continued reading in silence until his eyes stopped suddenly near the bottom of the page. What is it? Victoria asked. Ethan slowly lowered the letter. His face had gone pale. There is an address. An address? Ethan nodded. Not in Wisconsin. He looked directly at her. Montana. The kitchen seemed to shrink around them. Outside, the city continued moving through another ordinary evening. Inside, a forgotten letter had just transformed their entire search. And according to the date written beneath the address, Daniel Brooks had been alive nearly 10 years longer than anyone ever believed. 3 days later, Ethan and Victoria stood beneath a wide Montana sky that seemed to stretch forever. The air smelled of pine trees and dry grass. Snow dusted the distant mountain peaks, glowing white beneath the afternoon sun. After years of unanswered questions, a single address from an old letter had brought them nearly 1,400 miles from Chicago. Neither spoke much during the drive from the airport. Hope had a strange way of making people quiet. The address led them to a small town nestled between rolling hills and open ranchland. Main Street contained little more than a diner, a hardware store, a church, and a row of aging brick buildings. It looked like the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Ethan parked beside the diner and looked at the faded address written on a piece of paper. This is it. Victoria stared through the windshield. You think somebody will remember him? Ethan folded the paper carefully. If he lived here long enough, maybe. The bell above the diner's entrance chimed softly as they stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around them. Coffee brewed somewhere in the background. Country music played quietly from an old speaker near the kitchen. Several customers glanced up before returning to their meals. An elderly waitress approached with a friendly smile. Passing through, she asked. Ethan exchanged a look with Victoria. Actually, we are looking for someone. He placed the photograph of Daniel Brooks on the counter. The waitress adjusted her glasses and looked down. At first, nothing happened. Then her smile slowly disappeared. Well, I will be. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. You know him? Know him, she repeated softly. Honey, everybody knew Daniel. Silence settled over the table. Victoria lowered herself into a chair as if her legs had suddenly become weak. He lived here, she asked. For years. The waitress nodded. Best handyman this town ever had. Ethan struggled to find words. What happened to him? The woman hesitated. Not because she was hiding something. Because she was choosing her words carefully. Daniel passed away about 7 years ago. Ethan lowered his eyes. Beside him, Victoria stared at the photograph without speaking. The answer hurt, even though part of them had expected it. Another chance lost to time. Another door closed forever. The waitress gently touched the edge of the photograph. But he talked. About you. Ethan looked up sharply. What? Not by name. He never shared many details. She smiled sadly. But he always carried pictures. Victoria's breath caught. Pictures? The waitress nodded and pointed toward a white farmhouse visible through the diner window, several hundred yards away. His things were left to someone. Ethan followed her gaze. Who? The elderly woman smiled. A little girl he raised like family. The room suddenly felt still. Outside, the farmhouse sat quietly beneath the Montana sky. Somewhere inside that house waited the final chapter of Daniel Brooks's story. And neither Ethan nor Victoria was prepared for what they were about to learn. The gravel path leading to the farmhouse crunched beneath Ethan's boots as he and Victoria crossed the yard. The late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the fields. A wooden windmill turned slowly in the distance. Everything about the place felt peaceful, as if time moved differently here. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They had spent years searching for answers. Now those answers waited behind a simple white door. Ethan knocked gently. A few seconds later, the door opened. Standing there was a woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and sun-weathered features. She looked surprised to see visitors. "Can I help you?" she asked. Ethan held up the photograph. "We were told you knew this man." The woman's expression changed instantly. She took the picture with careful hands. "Daniel." Her voice carried warmth and affection. "You must come inside." The farmhouse smelled of fresh bread and pine wood. Family photographs covered the walls. A golden retriever slept near the fireplace. The woman introduced herself as Grace Turner. She poured coffee for everyone before sitting at the kitchen table. For several moments, she simply looked at the photograph. "He saved my life," she said quietly. Ethan exchanged a glance with Victoria. Grace smiled softly. "Not in the dramatic way people tell stories. I was 16. My parents died within the same year. I had nowhere to go. Daniel found me sleeping in my truck outside town during winter." Her eyes glistened. "He gave me a room, taught me how to work the ranch, helped me finish school. He never asked for anything in return." Ethan listened carefully. The more Grace spoke, the more the image of his father became clearer. Not a man who abandoned people, a man who quietly helped them, a man who built second chances wherever he went. "Did he ever talk about family?" Victoria asked. Grace nodded immediately. "Every day." Both Ethan and Victoria froze. Grace stood and walked toward a cabinet. She removed a large storage box and carried it to the table. "He kept these." Ethan opened the lid. Inside were photographs. Hundreds of them. School pictures of Ethan as a child. Birthday snapshots. Newspaper clippings. Even old report cards. Ethan stared in disbelief. "How?" Grace smiled. "He followed your life from a distance." Ethan's throat tightened. "Why did he never come back?" Grace reached deeper into the box and removed a leather journal. "Because he thought he was protecting you." Victoria looked confused. "Protecting him from what?" Grace opened the journal to a marked page. Daniel's handwriting filled every line. The room fell silent as Ethan began reading. Halfway down the page, he stopped breathing for a moment. Slowly, he looked up. "This cannot be right." Victoria leaned closer. "What is it?" Ethan's eyes moved back to the words. "My father knew about you." The kitchen became completely still. Grace lowered her gaze. Victoria stared at him without blinking. Ethan swallowed hard before reading the final sentence aloud. "If I ever find my daughter Victoria, tell her I never stopped looking." For several seconds, nobody moved. The only sound in the farmhouse was the soft ticking of an old clock hanging above the fireplace. Victoria stared at the journal resting on the table. Her eyes remained fixed on the page as though looking away might somehow make the words disappear. Ethan carefully handed the journal to her. She accepted it with trembling fingers and continued reading the paragraph in silence. Daniel had written about searching county records. He had written about hiring investigators whenever he could afford it. He had written about saving money for trips that never produced answers. Most of all, he had written about hope. Hope that one day he would find the daughter he had never met. Hope that one day his son would understand why he left. Grace quietly stepped away to give them privacy. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the farmhouse windows, filling the room with a warm golden glow. Victoria closed the journal against her chest. For the first time since Ethan had met her, she looked completely vulnerable. Not like a chief executive. Not like one of the most powerful women in America. Just a daughter who had finally found proof that she had been loved. Ethan sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long time. Some truths arrived too deep for immediate words. Eventually, Grace returned carrying a small wooden box. She placed it gently on the table. Daniel wanted this saved. Ethan opened the lid. Inside rested a pocket watch, several photographs, and a sealed envelope. Across the front were two names written in familiar handwriting. Ethan and Victoria. Both of them froze. Ethan carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Together, they read the final message. "If you are reading this, Then life finally found a way to bring you together. I spent many years wishing for that miracle. Ethan, I never stopped being proud of you. Victoria, I never stopped looking for you. The greatest regret of my life was time. But if there is one thing I learned, it is that family is not measured by years together. It is measured by love carried faithfully through the years apart. If you find each other, do not waste the time I lost. Build something better. Build something kind. Build something that lasts. By the time Ethan finished reading, tears filled his eyes. Across from him, Victoria quietly wiped her own. Outside, the Montana sky had begun turning shades of orange and gold as evening approached. Later that week, they returned to Chicago. Life slowly resumed its rhythm, yet nothing felt quite the same. Months passed. Victoria visited Ethan and Lily often. Sometimes they shared dinner. Sometimes they talked about Daniel. Sometimes they simply enjoyed the comfort of being together. One autumn evening, nearly a year after a delivery had unexpectedly changed. 3 lives, Ethan stood in his apartment kitchen watching Lily set the table. A knock sounded at the door. Lily ran to answer it. Victoria stepped inside carrying dessert. "You are late," Lily declared with a grin. Victoria laughed. "Traffic. That is your excuse every time." Ethan smiled as he watched them. The room filled with conversation, laughter, and the simple warmth of people who no longer felt alone. Above the table hung a framed photograph. Ethan, Lily, Victoria. 3 people connected by a story that almost remained hidden forever. As dinner began, Lily looked at Victoria and asked the same question she had once asked months earlier. "So, are you staying?" Victoria glanced around the room. Then she looked at Ethan. Finally, she looked at Lily. A gentle smile touched her face. "Yes," she said softly. "I think I am home." And for a moment, the room fell completely silent. Not because anyone lacked words, but because some miracles are best honored with gratitude, dignity, and quiet grace. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.